So you can, I have a phrase. It's a wilderness survival phrase. It goes like this: oh, it's one of those. And I teach all my students to be able to look at something and go, oh, it's one of those, which means one of three things.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to College Sharks. Today, we're going to talk about to test or not to test. And because I'm really good at a lot of things, one thing I'm not good at is tutoring. So we have tutor partners that we work with. And today, I want to introduce you to Laura Hoffman with Tutor Partners. Hey, Laura. And I also want to introduce you to my favorite tutor because we've been working together for several years now. And this is my friend Adam Rothberg, who's over the creek.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much for the introduction. It's great.
Of course, of course. So I'm just going to start off with some hard hitting because we're going to make this short. But the question is, Adam, I am a rising senior. I've got an okay test score. I've tested a few times. I really don't like it. But my coach Lee keeps saying that if I get a better score, I might get into a tougher major. I might get into a different school and I might get more merit aid. So to test or not to test, how can you help me?
Well, I don't want to complicate things. I want to keep them simple. But before we can do that, I would have to say, my main job is to read the student, not like with magic, although sometimes that's necessary. Just ask a few basic questions. What's your score goal? When are you taking it? What have you gotten before? What kind of course are you applying for? Make sure you get your intention set right. So if you're like, look, I need to raise my score, 150 points, then we would want to think about like, well, what were your previous score goals? What are your personal strengths and weaknesses? Because sometimes less is more. You can answer fewer questions and get a better score rather than scramble to get more done and get more wrong.
Time out. I can answer
Sure.
less questions and get a higher score.
Yeah, absolutely. So for example, if you tried to answer like 40 out of 40 questions and you were scrambling to get them all done, you might only, you might feel like you got them all done, but you might get a 27 out of 40. And if you try to do 27 out of 40 and guessed at the rest and got the others right with a high degree of probability, you'll get better than the 27. I've seen it happen many, many times where people are like, I'm not going to be able to increase my reading speed in 2 months. It takes most people much longer to change what you've conditioned yourself into for 10 plus years. So you're just like, oh, here's a simple strategy, which literally is more or less find out which ones take longer, find out which ones you're better at. People think differently and they maneuver differently through a standardized exam. So another thing I was going to say is, again, are you better cramming for 3 weeks to raise your score? Or do you need to dedicate 3 months and practice regularly and frequently? All different types of thinkers. As I said, my job is partly through dialogue and observation to determine what a best course of action for an individual might be.
Can I move my score 150 points? You said that. And is that strategy or is that learning stuff I just don't know?
Yeah, it really can be both, and it depends on the individual. Um, for most people, there's definitely some, again, I think, for example, the language portion has two parts. One is stylistic, that is your reading style and comprehension level. You've developed that over many, many years, and that's much, much harder to alter. So if you're going to have to increase your speed and comprehension, that will take several months of regular, frequent practice to literally physiologically reorganize your brain so you can function and perform better. If you just have to remember the use of punctuation, for example, you can do that in like 8 seconds, practice a few problems, go, oh yes, these are the 3 ways to separate two independent clauses type of thing. Same thing with math. You may have forgotten a few equations and you just put them back in your memory and see the 3 or 4 different types of questions that are posed to you. So you can, I have a phrase. It's a wilderness survival phrase. It goes like this: oh, it's one of those. And I teach all my students to be able to look at something and go, oh, it's one of those, which means one of three things. I know it and I can do it quickly and easily. Two, let me say that again. I know it absolutely and I can do it quickly. I know it absolutely, but it will take more time, or I am not 100% certain of what I'm looking at, and therefore I'll skip it and come back to it later, which is again where the less is more comes into play, because I feel like if I can answer 80% of these questions, I've already potentially beaten my previous score, and then the other 20% I can, close my eyes and randomly circle, hypothetically speaking, and get a better score. And I see it all the time. You know, you're like, wow, that's amazing that you can do that. I didn't think of that. That's why I'm here, to help you think of those things.
That's so encouraging because as you guys know, getting a higher score can do a lot of things for you. The best thing it can do is sometimes make your school less expensive because it will put you up a level to get that merit aid, which is the discount off of college tuition that schools are going to give you because they want a kid like you. So let's say you're like, okay, I'm ready to take the plunge and I'm ready to tutor for either the August, which if you're ready, you've got to start soon, or one of the soon upcoming tests this year. I'm ready. What are we going to do? We're going to turn you over to Laura. And Laura, how do you pick you know, I have a favorite, but how do you pick the right tutor for each student?
Thank you, Lee. So it really depends on the subject, but obviously we're talking SAT. Adam is our main SAT, ACT as well tutor, he has so many years of experience and he's just phenomenal. So I sing his praises to everybody. So it's a simple process and we get you on board and you get going and get learning all these wonderful strategies with Adam.
I do definitely have a closing remark, and it's in response to test or not to test. And again, I'm teaching my principles. The first thing I think of is Isaac Newton said, if I have seen farther than other people, it's because I stood on the shoulders of giants. And I'm not saying I've seen farther than others. What I'm saying is that I've collected a bunch of principles and practices and strategies from wilderness survival, the martial arts, pedagogy and education, from a whole bunch of different sources through time. And then you develop your own system and it makes sense to you. And hopefully, you know, it makes sense to other people. And part of that is say, look, take what I give you and make it your own. Change the words I use, change what's going on. And, you know, to test or not to test, you should always be ready, able, and willing to test. You know, I come from a school of wilderness survival, more or less. And when I go out in the woods, I don't want to eat the wrong plant, right? So what do? Many things. One, you study a lot, so when you see it, you know what it is. Two, if you don't know what it is and you're hungry, you got to test it over the course of like 3 or 4 days, you know. And so if you're taking a standardized exam, that standardized exam that you just practice for is completely applicable to playing the guitar or playing tennis or baking a cake. It's all literally the same thing. It's a universal set of principles, practices, and strategies that I would say you can access anytime. I often tell students 6 years from now, when you're like, oh yeah, this thing from him, you'll thank me, even if you don't remember it was me that gave it to you. And that's, you know, what I want is to advance people's, you know, mindset, advance their knowledge.